"Look at my poor ex-husband," Cassandra Monroe said, raising her champagne glass toward me. 8 years later, and Daniel Brooks is still broke, still alone, and still pretending he is one opportunity away from becoming somebody. The people around her laughed, and Cassandra made sure they heard what came next. Now he claims he has a wife. Did you invent an entire marriage just so you would not look pathetic at our reunion? I kept one hand beside my glass of ice water and answered calmly, I have been married for almost 3 years. Cassandra laughed even louder. 3 years? Then where is she? I told her she was on her way, but Cassandra only turned toward our former classmates, and said, of course she is. His imaginary wife is on her way. How convenient. What she did not know was that 2 days earlier, I had signed the final documents on a $396 million infrastructure contract with the city of Atlanta. The company responsible for the project belonged to me, and she had no idea who my wife was. Yet Cassandra's ignorance was not the only thing that caught my attention. The man standing beside her kept studying my father's old steel watch, as though he were trying to decide whether I was poor, powerful, or hiding something. My name is Daniel Brooks. I am 46 years old, and I have spent more than 20 years working in construction. That work taught me something simple. A building either stands or falls, no matter what anyone says about it. A man's life is much the same. His worth is not determined by what people say about him at a party. It is determined by what he builds when nobody is watching. 8 years earlier, Cassandra walked out of our small house in East Point, carrying 2 suitcases. She told me she needed a life that was moving forward. What she really meant was that she no longer believed I could give her the status she wanted. At the time, I managed small renovation crews, repaired warehouses, and bid on municipal jobs that rarely seemed to go my way. I worked long days, came home covered in dust, and spent most nights calculating payroll at the kitchen table. Cassandra saw the exhaustion, but she never saw the foundation being built beneath it. I did not chase her car down the street, call her family, or beg for another chance. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner, went back inside, and became quiet. Some people mistake a quiet man for a defeated one. They are not the same thing. 8 years passed before I attended another class reunion. It was held on a rainy Saturday night at the Ashford Grand Hotel in Buckhead, and I had almost refused the invitation. My oldest friend, Renee Carter, was the one who convinced me to go. 2 days before the event, she called while I was sitting in my truck outside a project site near Midtown. You have avoided these people for 8 years, she told me. Not because you are afraid of them, but because part of you still thinks you have something to explain. I told her I did not owe Cassandra an explanation. Renee replied, I know that. I am not sure you do. At the time, my company was nearing the largest contract in its history, but Renee was not talking about business. I told her I had a good life and did not need to walk into a ballroom to prove it. She answered, then do not go there to prove anything. Go there to close the door properly. So that Saturday evening, I put on a plain charcoal suit and drove to Buckhead alone. My wife, Olivia, planned to join me, but a board meeting at her education foundation was running late. Her organization supported literacy programs, scholarships, and after-school centers for students across Atlanta. She promised she would arrive as soon as possible. I told her she did not have to rush, but she replied, I am not letting you face that room alone. In the hotel elevator, I adjusted my jacket and briefly saw the tired man Cassandra had left behind. Then the doors opened, and that version of me disappeared. Cassandra was the first person I saw when I entered the ballroom. She stood near the center of the room in a red dress, surrounded by former classmates who laughed slightly too hard at everything she said. The moment she noticed me, her smile changed. "Well, look who finally showed up," she announced. "I suppose construction sites do not prepare you for formal occasions." A few people laughed. Beside her stood a tall man in a navy suit, with polished shoes and a smile that never reached his eyes. Cassandra slipped her arm through his and introduced him as Gavin Mercer. He extended his hand and said he worked in financial consulting and municipal development. His handshake was brief, and then his eyes dropped toward my watch. It was an old stainless steel Hamilton that had belonged to my father. "Vintage?" he asked. I told him it was my father's. He nodded, but I noticed the disappointment in his expression. He had hoped the watch would tell him something about my income. It told him nothing. Cassandra looked around me and asked whether I had come alone. I told her my wife was joining me. The group immediately went quiet. Cassandra blinked, laughed, and asked how long I had been married. When I told her almost 3 years, she turned toward her friends and asked whether anyone had ever met Daniel's wife. Nobody answered. She smiled and said, "That is what I thought." I explained that Olivia was finishing a meeting downtown and would arrive soon, but Cassandra softened her voice and said, "Daniel, you do not have to pretend. We all know the divorce was difficult for you." For years, I had imagined reminding her of every sacrifice she had forgotten. Standing in that ballroom, however, I felt no anger. I only felt distance. "I recovered," I said. Cassandra took a sip of champagne and asked again where my wife was. I repeated that she was on her way. The laughter returned, but Gavin did not join in. He continued studying my watch, my jacket, and my shoes, trying to reconcile the man Cassandra had described with the man standing in front of him. Cassandra asked whether I was still working in construction. When I said yes, she told the group that I had always dreamed of building half the city. One of our former classmates remembered that I had wanted to own a company. Cassandra shrugged and said, "Some dreams do not survive adulthood." Her words pulled me back to a night I had not thought about in years. Cassandra had enrolled in a professional certification program we could not afford. So I sold the framing tools my grandfather had left me and used the money to pay her tuition. I never told her where it came from. On the night of her first networking event, I worked a double shift and drove through a storm to pick her up. I waited outside because I did not want to embarrass her by entering in dirty work clothes. By the time she came outside, the rain had soaked through my jacket and filled my shoes. She looked at me beneath the awning and asked, "Why do you always look so pathetic?" I laughed it off, because in those days, I believed patience meant absorbing every insult without complaint. There were many other moments like that. I worked weekends to help her family and turned down a distant project because she said the time apart would make her feel abandoned. A few months later, she accused me of lacking ambition. At the time, those things felt like love. It took me years to understand that a man can pour everything he has into a cup someone else has already decided not to drink from. Cassandra's voice pulled me back into the ballroom. She asked whether I had been remembering our marriage. I told her it had taught me a great deal. Gavin leaned toward her and whispered something I could not fully hear, but I caught the final words. "He does not look broke." Cassandra shot him a warning glance before placing a hand on his arm and announcing that Gavin advised major developers that they lived near Ponce City Market, traveled frequently, and attended charity events. She said they had built a wonderful life. I told her I was happy for them. The sincerity of my answer irritated her, because she wanted me to compete. If I competed, she could prove she had won. She asked what I had built, and I replied, "A life I am proud of." When she complained that my answer was vague, I told her my life had not been built for an audience. Across the ballroom, I noticed Tasha Bennett watching us. She had always been quiet and observant, and now she worked in regulatory compliance on public projects. Her eyes moved from Gavin to Cassandra, and finally to me. She gave me a small nod. It was not a greeting. It was a signal, although I did not yet know what she knew. Cassandra stepped closer and said, "You confuse being quiet with being strong. The truth is, you were afraid of success. That is why I left." I could have told her that my company employed hundreds of people, that our crews had rebuilt bridges and upgraded water systems across Georgia, or that the city contract had been signed 2 days earlier. I said none of it. Instead, I quietly warned her to slow down, because she was about to say something she could not take back. For 1 second, uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly laughed and said she had nothing to take back. She tightened her grip on Gavin's arm and added, "I have a successful man beside me." "And you have what?" "An old watch, a tired suit, and a wife nobody has ever seen." The laughter around her had almost completely disappeared, but Cassandra did not notice. She was too committed to the performance. I checked the time. Olivia's meeting should have ended nearly 30 minutes earlier. Cassandra saw me looking at my watch and asked whether I was waiting for my imaginary wife to call. I told her Olivia did not need to call, but a few nervous chuckles still moved through the group. I felt no anger, only a strange sadness for the woman standing in front of me. Cassandra had spent 8 years convincing herself that leaving me had been the correct choice. That was why she needed me to remain poor, lonely, and broken. My failure was the evidence she used to defend her decision, and she was terrified that the evidence might disappear. Across the ballroom, Tasha unfolded her arms. Gavin noticed the movement and looked toward her. For the first time that evening, his polished expression cracked. He leaned toward Cassandra and suggested that they move somewhere else. But she ignored him. She kept her eyes on me and said, "Admit it, Daniel. There is no wife." I held her gaze and answered, "She will be here." At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. The sound was soft beneath the jazz music, but something in the room changed. Guests near the entrance turned first, and then others followed. Conversations faded as a woman wearing a dark emerald gown stepped inside. Her hair was swept back, and she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had never needed a room's permission to belong in it. Several guests recognized her before Cassandra did. I heard someone near the bar whisper her name. The woman paused, searched the room, and smiled when her eyes found mine. Then she began walking directly toward me. Cassandra turned to see who had captured everyone's attention, and the smile vanished. Olivia crossed the ballroom without hesitation. She wore a dark emerald gown, her hair swept back, and she moved with the calm confidence of someone who had never needed a room's permission to belong in it. Several guests recognized her before Cassandra did. I heard someone near the bar whisper, "Is that Olivia Brooks from the New Horizon Education Foundation?" Olivia came straight to me, took my hand in both of hers, and kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry I'm late, sweetheart," she said. The board meeting ran long. The same people who had laughed when Cassandra called my wife imaginary now stood in silence. Cassandra stared at Olivia's hand in mine, then forced a thin smile. "So you're Daniel's wife?" Olivia looked at her and answered simply, "Yes, I am, and I'm very proud of my husband." Cassandra's cruelty had never really been about me. It was protection against a fear she had carried since the divorce, the fear that leaving a loyal man for status had been the worst decision of her life. Mocking me in front of people who remembered our marriage was not confidence. It was a performance she needed in order to keep believing her own story. Olivia walking through those doors was the exact fear Cassandra had spent 8 years trying to outrun. Olivia leaned close enough that only I could hear her. She told me Tasha had called while she was on the way and said Cassandra was making a scene. Then she added that my attorney had sent the final notice because I had not answered my phone. The last city signature had come through that afternoon. The $396 million infrastructure contract was officially closed. I felt the news settle quietly in my chest. 18 months of work had come down to one final signature, but I did not need to announce it to the room. Olivia straightened, still holding my hand, while Cassandra tried to recover. She said she had no idea I had married someone like Olivia. Olivia replied, Most people do not take the time to find out what someone actually has." There was no malice in her voice, only fact. I remembered meeting Olivia at a community fundraiser 3.5 years earlier. She watched me stay behind to help an elderly custodian move folding chairs after the cameras were gone. What we built afterward came through ordinary days, honest work, and the way we treated each other when no audience was present. Cassandra looked at me again, this time more carefully. She noticed the suit she had called tired, the old watch Gavin kept studying, and the woman standing beside me whom half the room recognized. "What exactly do you do now?" she asked. "Are you still in construction?" I told her I ran a construction and infrastructure company, and that we had just closed a contract with the city. I did not mention the amount. I did not need to. Gavin shifted beside her, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uneasy. He had spent the evening measuring me like a problem he could solve. But the numbers were no longer adding up. Cassandra forced another smile and said she was happy for me, though she sounded like a woman feeling the floor tilt beneath her feet. She suggested that she and Gavin would love to hear more about the business. Gavin did not answer. He was still watching me, but there was no curiosity in his expression. There was caution. The reaction of the room changed quickly. A former classmate recognized Brooks Infrastructure Group and asked whether it was my company. When I said yes, people began connecting my face to a name they had seen on public projects for years. The same classmates who had ignored me near the back of the ballroom now moved closer. Success had not changed who I was. It had only changed how carefully certain people listened. Cassandra watched the attention move away from her. She had entered the reunion expecting admiration for her clothes, her home, and the man beside her. Instead, the room had begun turning toward the ex-husband she had publicly humiliated. She tried to reshape the story by saying she had always known I would eventually succeed. I reminded her that she once told me I would spend my life repairing other people's mistakes. She dismissed it as something said during a difficult marriage, but I could see she remembered more than she wanted to admit. Olivia remained calm beside me. Cassandra turned to her and said she must be a very patient woman. Olivia answered, "I have never had to wait for Daniel to become worthy of my respect." The sentence landed harder than any insult could have. Olivia explained that when we met, she did not know how successful my company was. She only saw how I treated people after everyone important had gone home. Cassandra asked whether I supported education programs, and Olivia said I had done so for years. I gave her a small glance because I had never wanted that part of my life discussed publicly, but she did not say more. Across the ballroom, Tasha continued watching us with her arms folded. I noticed that her attention had shifted from Cassandra to Gavin. He placed his empty glass on a passing tray and told Cassandra they should leave. She asked why he was acting strangely. He said the reunion was hers, not his, and repeated that they should go. Cassandra ignored him. She was still trying to regain control of the room. My friend Renee appeared beside me and quietly said that closing the door properly might take it off its hinges. I almost laughed. Cassandra told Renee the situation did not concern her. But Renee reminded her that she had made it everyone's concern when she mocked me in front of half the ballroom. Cassandra said she had only been joking, yet none of the people around her looked amused anymore. Near the stage, the reunion organizer announced that the alumni scholarship presentation would begin soon. A photograph of several graduating students appeared on the projection screen beneath the words Future Leaders Scholarship Endowment. Cassandra glanced toward it and said she donated to the program every year. Renee asked how much. Cassandra called the question personal. Renee smiled faintly and replied that the amount did not matter. Cassandra failed to understand the remark, but Tasha did. Tasha unfolded her arms and began walking toward us. She moved with the steady, unhurried confidence of someone who had spent years finding details other people hoped would remain hidden. When she reached the group, she looked directly at Cassandra and said, "That is enough." Cassandra told her the matter did not concern her. Tasha replied that it did, because some of them had known for years what kind of man I was, while Cassandra had built the entire evening around pretending otherwise. Then Tasha turned toward the scholarship photograph and told the room that for the last 6 years, I had quietly funded most of the endowment at our old high school. Every student whose tuition they had celebrated at alumni dinners had been helped by money from a charitable trust connected to me. She had discovered it by accident during a compliance review the previous spring. A murmur moved through the ballroom. People turned toward me, and someone near the back asked whether I had been the anonymous donor all along. I felt something tighten and loosen in my chest at the same time. I had written the first check alone at my kitchen table years earlier, believing it did not need my name attached to matter. I had never expected the donations to become public. The fund mattered because I remembered students from our neighborhood choosing between college applications and helping their families pay rent. I did not want a plaque. I wanted the money to reach the students. Cassandra stared at me and asked why I had hidden something like that. Before I could answer, Tasha said, "Because not everyone gives in order to be seen." Cassandra asked why I had allowed everyone to believe I was unsuccessful. I told her I did not control what people chose to believe. She said I could have corrected them, and I answered that I could have. But doing something good did not become more valuable because a ballroom applauded it. For a moment, I thought Tasha was finished. Then she turned toward Gavin. His face had gone pale. He took a small step backward, but Tasha told him to stay exactly where he was. Gavin forced a smile and asked whether they had met. Tasha said they had not, but she had seen his name buried inside enough shell company documents to feel as though they had. Cassandra slowly turned toward him. Tasha explained that 2 years earlier, someone had tried to route a falsified subcontractor bid through one of my municipal projects. The vendor records were fake, the invoices were inflated, and the consulting company behind them was connected to Gavin. Cassandra's champagne glass began trembling in her hand as she asked him what Tasha was talking about. Gavin not answer. The scholarship revelation had shocked the room, but everyone could sense that something far more damaging was about to come into the open. Gavin finally spoke, but the confidence had left his voice. He called the subcontractor issue a misunderstanding and said complicated municipal projects often produced paperwork errors. Tasha did not raise her voice. She told him forged insurance documents, inflated invoices, and a vendor registered to an empty office were not paperwork errors. She explained that the false bid had been routed through several consulting entities connected to him, and that my compliance team had stopped it before any money changed hands. Cassandra looked at Gavin, waiting for him to deny everything strongly enough to make the accusation disappear. Instead, he told her not to make the situation worse. That was the first moment I saw real fear replace the pride on her face. Until then, she had built her entire evening around presenting Gavin as proof that she had chosen a better life. Now the man beside her could not look her in the eye. Tasha turned toward Cassandra and asked whether she truly wanted to pretend she knew nothing about the fake vendor. Cassandra said Gavin had described it as a billing dispute involving one of his clients. Tasha reminded her that Cassandra's name appeared on an email connected to one of the shell companies. Cassandra immediately said she had only forwarded documents and never understood what they were for. Gavin stepped half a pace away from her and said she had chosen to involve herself. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. Whispers spread through the ballroom. Someone near the bar questioned how Gavin had afforded his lifestyle on consulting fees. Another person mentioned the condominium Cassandra had been boasting about. The same classmates who had laughed with her earlier now began drifting away, suddenly interested in their drinks or the scholarship presentation. Cassandra turned toward me and asked whether I had known about Gavin's scheme. I told her my legal and compliance teams had discovered the false bid, disqualified the vendor, and reported the irregularities through the proper channels. She demanded to know why I had never warned her. I told her I had never met Gavin in person before that night, and that my responsibility had been to protect my company, my employees, and the public project. I did not need to create a scene. She asked whether I knew she was connected to him when the bid appeared. I did not answer immediately. Olivia's hand remained steady in mine. Before I could decide how much to say, she looked at Cassandra and calmly told her there was something else she needed to understand. I had known about Cassandra and Gavin long before the divorce was filed. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear ice shifting inside a glass several feet away. Cassandra stared at me and asked whether I had known about the affair. I told her I had. I had suspected the truth almost a year before she left and confirmed it several months later. There had been hotel receipts she claimed belonged to a coworker, late-night calls she took outside, and business dinners that never appeared on her calendar. Then one evening, a message from Gavin appeared on her phone while it was lying beside me. I did not search for it. The screen lit up, and the words were impossible to misunderstand. For weeks, I tried to convince myself there was another explanation. That ended the night I saw Cassandra get into Gavin's car outside a restaurant where she had told me she was meeting her sister. I sat in my truck across the street and watched them drive away together. I could have followed them, confronted her, or called her family. Instead, I drove home and sat alone at the kitchen table until morning. At the time, I believed silence was dignity. Looking back, part of it was fear. I was afraid that if I forced her to choose, she would choose him. As long as I said nothing, I could pretend there was still a chance she might return to the marriage on her own. Cassandra asked why I stayed if I knew. I told her the truth. For a long time, I believed that if I worked harder, became more successful, and remained patient enough, she would eventually see what she had. I thought loyalty could be earned through sacrifice. I wanted her to choose me freely, not because she had been exposed, but because she finally understood my value. I told her she never did, and eventually I stopped waiting for her to see me. I learned how to see myself. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no satisfaction. I had imagined that conversation many times during the years after the divorce. In those imagined versions, I always had a cutting sentence ready, standing there. Those words felt unnecessary. The truth was already doing more than cruelty ever could. There is a kind of justice that shouts, and there is another kind that simply stands still while every lie collapses under its own weight. I had spent 8 years learning the difference. Cassandra turned toward Gavin and asked whether he had known I was aware of the affair. He said he assumed I suspected, but never believed I would do anything about it. The contempt in his voice was directed at both of us. Cassandra reminded him that he had promised to give her the life I never could. She said he told her she would never have to worry about money, status, or being married to a man who came home covered in dust. Gavin looked around the ballroom and told her not to create another scene. Her voice rose as she said she had lied for him, defended his business dealings, and assured her family that their lifestyle was legitimate. She had spent years telling everyone he was the better choice. Gavin straightened his jacket and said that sounded like her problem. The words struck her harder than anything Tasha had revealed. Cassandra had left me because she believed loyalty mattered less than status. Now, in the first moment when she truly needed the man she had chosen, he stepped away from her without hesitation. Renee stood beside Olivia and me with her arms folded. She leaned closer and whispered that closing the door properly had apparently required taking it off its hinges. I almost laughed. Cassandra looked toward the classmates who had encouraged her earlier, searching for the support that had carried her performance. She found none. Some had moved toward the bar, while others studied the floor or the projection screen. Tasha stepped beside me and said she probably should have spoken years earlier. I told her she had spoken at the exact moment the truth needed to be heard. She had not exposed Gavin for entertainment or revenge. She had spoken because public money, my company's reputation, and other people's futures were involved. Cassandra looked at me again and asked whether I had ever planned to tell her that I knew about the affair. I said there had been many nights when I rehearsed the words, many mornings when I almost called her back, and even one day when I printed the messages and placed them inside an envelope. I never left it on the table. At the time, I thought staying silent preserved the possibility of reconciliation. In reality, I was preserving a version of the marriage that no longer existed. Cassandra asked whether I hated her. I told her I did not. Hatred required an attachment I no longer carried. What I had felt for years was grief, not only for the marriage, but for the man I had been inside it, the man who believed he had to suffer quietly in order to deserve love. I had forgiven her long before the reunion, but forgiveness did not mean returning to the past or pretending it had not happened. It meant I had stopped allowing it to decide who I was. For a moment, nobody moved. Olivia's hand was warm in mine, and I realized there was nothing else I needed from that ballroom. I did not need Cassandra to apologize in front of everyone. I did not need Gavin to confess, and I did not need our classmates to understand the full story. Closure had not arrived through the reunion. It had been built quietly through thousands of ordinary decisions. Opening my first office, making payroll, hiring people, funding scholarships, and learning to wake without wondering whether Cassandra approved of the life I was building. I turned toward Olivia, and neither of us needed to speak. We knew it was time to leave. As we walked toward the ballroom doors, Cassandra called my name. Her voice sounded thinner than it had at the beginning of the evening, stripped of the confidence she had used to control the room. She asked me to wait, then said please when I kept walking. I did not turn around. It was not punishment. There was simply nothing behind me that I needed to retrieve. Olivia and I crossed the hotel lobby and stepped outside into the cool October air. The rain had stopped, leaving Peachtree Road shining beneath the streetlights. I opened the passenger door for her, walked around the car, and started the engine. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. Atlanta continued moving as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars passed beneath traffic lights. Restaurant workers stacked chairs behind windows, and a doorman stood beneath an awning checking his phone. There was something comforting about the city's indifference. One ballroom could collapse under the weight of old lies, and the streets outside would still carry people home. As we drove away from Buckhead, Olivia rested her hand lightly on my arm and told me I had never shared the entire story with her. I asked what part she meant. She looked through the windshield for a moment, then told me she had found the notebook in the bottom drawer of my old desk 2 years earlier. It was filled with dates, memories, and the things Cassandra had said to me during our marriage. My hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. I had never told Olivia about that notebook. She said she had left it where she found it, because she understood it was personal. But after what happened in the ballroom, she finally wanted to know why I had kept it. I watched the lights of Atlanta stretch across the wet road ahead, and realized that although I had walked away from Cassandra, there was still one part of the past I had never fully explained. I kept my eyes on the wet road ahead as Olivia's question settled between us. She told me she had found the notebook 2 years earlier while cleaning the study. It had been hidden in the bottom drawer of my old desk, beneath business records and folders I had not opened in years. Inside were pages of things Cassandra had said to me during our marriage, every insult and put down written beside the date it happened. Olivia said she had read only enough to understand what it was before placing it back where she found it. She had never mentioned it because she knew it was personal, but after what happened at the reunion, she finally understood why I might have kept it. I told her the notebook had never been evidence I planned to use against Cassandra. I kept it so I would not forget who I had once allowed to define me. During the first years after the divorce, whenever I lost a contract, struggled to make payroll, or wondered whether starting my own company had been a mistake, I would open it and read one of those pages. I did not read them because I wanted to feel the pain again. I read them to remind myself never to return to the man who had accepted those words as truth. Cassandra had told me I was weak, unambitious, and destined to remain invisible. After hearing those things for long enough, her voice had begun to sound like my own. The notebook helped me separate the two. It reminded me that the voice telling me to give up had entered my life through someone else. I told Olivia it had never made me hate Cassandra. It only made sure I never mistook her judgment for my identity. Olivia rested her hand lightly on my arm and said I could have thrown the notebook away after everything that happened that night. I told her I might finally be ready. For years, those pages had been the only honest conversation I was having with myself. I could still remember holding the notebook late at night in my first office, reading an entry from some ordinary Tuesday, and treating Cassandra's words like a prediction I needed to disprove. The notebook had pushed me through difficult years, but I was beginning to understand that carrying proof of an old wound was still a way of carrying the wound. Outside the car, Atlanta moved past us in wet reflections. Storefront lights stretched across the pavement, a bakery was closing for the evening, and a doorman stood beneath an awning looking at his phone. The city continued with its ordinary night, completely unaware of what had happened inside the ballroom. There was something comforting about that. A room could fill with accusations, revelations, and regret, yet the world outside kept moving. I thought about Olivia's father, a retired electrician who had spent 30 years wiring homes before his knees forced him to stop. Early in our relationship, Olivia told me she had not fallen for me despite my work boots and calloused hands. She had noticed me because of them. She had grown up watching a man return home tired from honest work and call it a good day. Cassandra had looked at the same kind of hands and seen failure. Olivia saw character. My phone buzzed inside my jacket as we stopped at a red light. I took it out and saw a message from a number I had never saved, though I recognized it immediately. Cassandra had written, "I'm sorry for tonight. I'm sorry for a lot of things." I stared at the screen while the light remained red. 8 years earlier, those words would have meant everything to me. I had spent months after the divorce imagining that she might call, admit she had made a mistake, and finally acknowledge what I had given to the marriage. I once believed her regret would repair something inside me. Sitting beside Olivia, the apology felt different. It did not make me angry, but it did not give me the satisfaction I had once expected either. It was an answer arriving after I had stopped asking the question. Olivia glanced toward me without asking to see the message. When I told her it was Cassandra, she quietly said I did not have to answer that night, or ever if I did not want to. I turned the phone face down in the cup holder as the traffic light changed. Some doors do not need to be slammed shut. You can let them close under their own weight, and silence can become an answer of its own. We said little during the rest of the drive. Some silences feel empty because two people have nothing left to say. The silence between Olivia and me felt complete because the important things had already been understood. When we reached home, the porch light was on, warm and steady against the dark. Olivia always left it burning when we expected to return late. I remained in the car for a few seconds after switching off the engine and looked at the house we had built a real life inside. The street was quiet, the windows dark, and nothing about the place was designed to impress anyone. Yet everything I once believed I needed was waiting behind that door. A wife who stood beside me instead of walking ahead of me. A home where silence did not mean punishment. A life that did not depend on anyone else believing it was valuable. Olivia asked whether I was all right, and I told her I thought I finally was. Inside, I stood in the hallway listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around us. The heating system started somewhere below, the refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and the wooden floor shifted beneath our steps. Olivia put the kettle on the way she did most evenings, whether either of us truly wanted tea or not. The ritual was less about the drink than the 10 quiet minutes we spent together before allowing the day to end. I sat at the worn oak table we had bought second-hand during our first year together. There was a faint water ring near one edge that Olivia said gave it character. I thought about Cassandra standing beneath the chandeliers, Gavin stepping away from her, and 8 years spent choosing not to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. Then I thought about the man I used to be, sitting at a smaller table after midnight and trying to make one paycheck stretch across two people's expectations. That man would not have believed in this kitchen, this quiet, or the woman sitting across from me. I was grateful that I had not needed him to believe it. I had only needed him to keep going until the life became real. Olivia placed 2 mugs on the table and sat across from me. She did not ask whether I planned to answer Cassandra. She did not ask what would happen to Gavin or whether the reunion guests would continue talking after we left. She simply let the quiet remain between us. Sitting beneath the low kitchen light, I understood something the people in that ballroom would never see. They would remember Olivia's entrance, Cassandra's face going pale, the scholarship revelation, and Tasha exposing Gavin's scheme. They might tell the story as though the most important moment was when everyone discovered I was successful. But none of that was the part that mattered to me. What mattered was sitting in an ordinary kitchen at the end of an extraordinary night with a woman who had never required me to prove my worth in order to earn her love. I felt no need to replay the reunion or imagine sharper words I might have said. I was simply home. Still, I knew one conversation remained before I could put the entire 8 years behind me. The next morning, I stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee and looked toward the trees a few blocks from Grant Park. The sky was pale gray, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice at the mail carrier before becoming quiet. Olivia came outside wearing an old cardigan she refused to replace and handed me another cup, even though the one in my hand was already going cold. She always said cold coffee was a reminder to slow down, not a mistake that needed fixing. She stood beside me for a while before asking why I had remained in the marriage after discovering the affair. I thought about the answer before speaking. I told her I had believed that if I became successful enough, patient enough, and quiet enough, Cassandra would eventually see what she had. I thought if I proved myself, she would finally choose me the way I had chosen her. Instead of treating the affair as evidence of her decisions, I treated it as proof that I had failed to become worthy of her loyalty. I kept working, sacrificing, and waiting because I believed love could be earned through endurance. Somewhere along the way, however, I stopped needing Cassandra to see my value. I only needed to see it myself. Olivia studied me before asking whether I hated Cassandra after everything that had happened. I smiled for the first time since the reunion and told her I had forgiven Cassandra a long time earlier. The person I had not forgiven was the version of myself who believed he had to earn the right to be loved. I had been angry with the man standing in the rain outside the conference center, accepting humiliation as the price of loyalty. I had been angry with the husband who discovered the affair and remained silent because he was afraid of being rejected openly. But standing beside Olivia that morning, I understood that the younger version of me had not been weak. He had used the only tools he understood: patience, labor, and sacrifice. He had simply been trying to repair something the other person had already abandoned. I told Olivia I did not owe anyone proof anymore. Not Cassandra, not the people in the ballroom, and not even the frightened man I used to be. Olivia leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stood there while our coffee cooled in our hands. The greatest victory of the previous night had not been watching Cassandra's performance collapse. It was not the city contract, the scholarship fund, Gavin's exposure, or Olivia entering the ballroom at exactly the right moment. The greatest victory of the previous night had not been watching Cassandra's performance collapse. It was not the city contract, the scholarship fund, Gavin's exposure, or Olivia entering the ballroom at exactly the right moment. The real victory was standing on my own porch the next morning without needing anyone's applause. No ballroom, confrontation, or public revelation could give a person that kind of peace. It had to be built quietly, morning after ordinary morning, long after anyone stopped watching. I thought about the notebook still sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk and decided I would finally let it go. I would not burn it, tear it apart in anger, or turn the moment into a performance. I would remove it quietly, the same way I had done most things that truly mattered in my life. Some chapters do not need a dramatic ending. They only need you to stop turning back to read them again. Later that morning, I went into the study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The notebook lay beneath a stack of old contracts, exactly where it had been for years. Its cover was worn, and several pages had bent corners from the nights I had opened it in anger, fear, or exhaustion. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat alone for a while. I did not read every entry. I opened it near the middle and found a page dated on an ordinary Tuesday, nearly 9 years earlier. Cassandra had told me that no one respected a man who spent his life working with his hands. Beneath her words, I had written one question to myself. What if she is right? I looked at that sentence for a long time. My father had worked with his hands. Olivia's father had spent 30 years as an electrician. The men and women employed by my company built roads, repaired water systems, restored schools, and made entire neighborhoods safer. There was dignity in that work that no expensive suit or polished title could create. Cassandra had never been right. I had simply been too wounded to trust what I already knew. I closed the notebook and placed my hand on the cover. I did not want to burn it, tear it apart, or use it to create one final dramatic moment. Healing did not need an audience. I found a plain cardboard box near the garage and placed the notebook inside with old newspapers and documents waiting to be recycled. It would leave the house quietly, without ceremony. For years, I had used those pages to remind myself that Cassandra's voice was not my own. Now I had something stronger than written evidence. I had a life in which her voice no longer appeared unless I invited it back. Some chapters do not need to be destroyed. You simply stop returning to them, and eventually they lose the power to call your name. That afternoon, I called Rini to thank her for convincing me to attend the reunion. She asked whether I had finally closed the door. I told her the door had nearly come off its hinges, and she laughed. I asked whether she had expected the night to unfold the way it did. Rini said she had not known Olivia would arrive at the exact moment Cassandra was calling her imaginary, and she certainly had not expected Tasha to expose Gavin in front of the entire ballroom. What she had known was that I was finally ready to stop carrying the past alone. She told me I had spent years confusing silence with freedom. Refusing to discuss an old wound did not mean the wound had healed. Sometimes it only meant a person had become skilled at hiding the weight. Then Renee's voice softened, and she told me my grandmother would have been proud of how I handled the room. My grandmother used to sit in a wooden rocking chair on the porch of her small house in southwest Atlanta and tell me that patience was not the same as doing nothing. For years, I misunderstood her. I thought patience meant accepting disrespect without complaint and waiting quietly for people to become kinder. What she meant was that patience allowed a person to continue building while everyone else was distracted by appearances. She also told me that the people who spoke most loudly about my failures were often the ones most afraid I might prove them wrong. It had taken me almost 20 years to understand a lesson she could deliver in 10 seconds. Renee said that was how wisdom worked. It waited until life made us ready to hear it. After we ended the call, I thought about what people inherit from the ones who raise them. Some inherit money, land, tools, or family businesses. Others inherit a way of carrying themselves when the entire room expects them to break. My father had left me his watch. My grandmother had left me steadiness. The watch reminded me that honest work did not need to announce itself. Her words reminded me that remaining calm was not the same as surrendering. Those were the inheritances that had carried me through the years when the company was small, the debts were large, and Cassandra's predictions still sounded possible. The more I thought about the reunion, the more clearly I understood Cassandra's behavior. Her cruelty had never truly been about my suit, my watch, or the fact that I arrived alone. She needed me to remain the man she had left, because my failure protected the story she told herself. If I was still poor, lonely, and broken, then leaving me had been an act of wisdom. If I had built a good life without her, then she would have to face the possibility that she traded loyalty for appearance. Mocking me in front of our former classmates was not confidence. It was a performance for herself as much as for anyone watching. Olivia's arrival forced Cassandra to confront the fear she had spent 8 years trying to escape. That another woman had recognized what she had refused to see. The contract, the company, and the scholarship fund made that realization harder, but none of them was the part that truly broke her. The moment that changed everything was watching Gavin step away when the room turned against him. Cassandra had told herself that she left a weak man and chose a powerful one. In reality, she left a loyal man and built her new life around someone who was loyal only to his own comfort. The moment she needed Gavin to stand beside her, he treated her fear as a problem she had created for herself. I did not take pleasure in that. Consequences are not always satisfying to witness. Sometimes they are simply sad. Cassandra had hurt me, but she was still a person standing inside the results of her own choices. I hoped the reunion would eventually teach her something more useful than shame. I hoped she would learn the difference between status and character, between attention and love, and between someone who looks impressive in public and someone who remains beside you when the room becomes difficult. But her healing was no longer my responsibility. For years, I had tried to carry both sides of our marriage. I would not carry both sides of our closure. Her apology remained unanswered on my phone. I read it once more that evening and then placed the device face down. I did not block her in anger or send a final message designed to hurt her. I simply chose not to respond. An apology can be sincere and still arrive too late to reopen a relationship. Forgiveness did not require me to return to the role I once played in Cassandra's life. It did not require me to comfort her because Gavin had failed her or reassure her that everything would be all right. Forgiveness meant I could wish her peace without surrendering my own. Some doors can close gently and still remain closed. The following Monday, I arrived at the headquarters of Brooks Infrastructure Group before 7 in the morning. Engineers were already reviewing maps, project managers were comparing schedules, and administrative staff were preparing the documents needed to begin the new city contract. Several employees congratulated me as I walked through the building, but their excitement was not about a number printed in a newspaper. They understood what the project meant. It meant stable employment, apprenticeship opportunities, work for local vendors, repaired roads, safer drainage systems, and years of improvements in neighborhoods that had been ignored for too long. I stood outside the main conference room and watched the team prepare. 20 years earlier, I had owned little more than a used pickup truck, mismatched tools, and the belief that I could build something of my own. There had never been one dramatic moment when failure suddenly became success. It happened through thousands of ordinary decisions: returning calls, correcting estimates, paying employees before paying myself, refusing dishonest shortcuts, admitting mistakes, showing up when I was tired, treating people with respect when nobody important was watching. The people at the reunion saw the city contract and believed they were witnessing the moment I became successful. They were wrong. The real work had happened during the years when none of them knew my name. Before entering the meeting, I looked down at the steel watch on my wrist. Gavin had studied it because he believed every object was evidence of wealth or weakness. To me, the watch meant something else. My father had worn it through decades of ordinary work. The scratches on the clasp came from ladders, machinery, and countless days spent providing for his family. It did not tell the room what I owned. It reminded me of where I came from and the kind of man I wanted to remain. I walked into the conference room, greeted my team, and began discussing drainage systems, transportation corridors, hiring schedules, and the neighborhoods affected by our decisions. There was no jazz music, no chandelier, and no one from the reunion watching. That was exactly how I wanted it. People would remember the reunion differently. Some would remember Olivia entering in the emerald gown and watching Cassandra's face lose its color. Others would remember the scholarship revelation, Tasha exposing Gavin, or the news of the $396 million contract. They might tell the story as though it were about a wealthy man taking revenge on the ex-wife who underestimated him. They would be missing the point. I did not win because I had more money than Cassandra believed. I did not win because Gavin was exposed, or because the ballroom finally respected me. I won because I had quietly built a life so steady that it no longer needed anyone's approval to stand. That experience taught me that healing rarely arrives with fireworks. It often appears through small, deliberate rituals. It can be taking out an old mug connected to someone you miss and writing down 3 memories you still value. It can be inviting a grandchild over on a quiet Saturday and using the same mixing bowl your mother once used. It can be choosing not to defend yourself when someone has already decided who you are. You can notice the insult, write it down if you need to, and then return your attention to the life in front of you. Dignity is rarely a perfect speech delivered at the perfect moment. Sometimes it is a Tuesday spent tending a garden instead of tending someone else's opinion. Sometimes it is choosing the porch swing over the argument or calling someone you love instead of trying to prove a point to someone who stopped listening years ago. Peace is not passive. It is built like a bridge, a home, or a company. Every honest decision becomes part of the foundation. Every boundary becomes another support. Every day we refuse to let another person's cruelty become our inner voice. The structure grows stronger. I once believed success would feel like entering a room and forcing everyone who doubted me to admit they had been wrong. I know better now. Real success is leaving that room without needing their admission. It is returning home to a life that remains steady after the attention disappears. That evening, I saw the porch light glowing before I turned into the driveway. Olivia was in the kitchen with 2 mugs waiting on the table. The cardboard box containing the notebook was gone, collected with the rest of the recycling earlier that day. I noticed the empty space beside the garage door, but felt no desire to search for what had left. I sat across from my wife, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and listened to the ordinary sounds of the house settling around us. I did not wonder what Cassandra was doing. I did not check my phone for another apology or search for news about Gavin. I did not replay the reunion and imagine sharper words I could have said. I looked at Olivia and understood that the life in front of me mattered more than every room behind me. The ballroom had been loud, dramatic, and filled with people eager to decide what my life meant. My kitchen was quiet. Nothing needed explaining there. No one needed convincing. I was no longer the man standing in the rain, waiting to be chosen. I was not the husband who believed love required the surrender of dignity. I was simply Daniel Brooks, a husband, a builder, an employer, and a man who had finally learned that his worth did not depend on anyone else recognizing it. Olivia reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. We remained there without speaking while the porch light shone through the window behind us. Some silences are empty because there is nothing left between 2 people. Ours was full of everything that mattered: trust, respect, work worth doing, and a future that did not need to be compared with the past. I had spent years believing closure would arrive through the right confrontation. Instead, it arrived in an ordinary kitchen, with no audience and no applause. I was finally home.